Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Michele Scarlet's True Health Podcast. Today we're speaking to Annika Carroll, women's sleep coach. She is the CEO of Sleep Like a Boss and founder of the Sleep Mastery Method. Hi Annika, how are you doing today?
Good. Hi, Michelle. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I got to ask the question, you are a women's sleep coach. How well did you sleep last night?
Honestly, last night was a disaster.
Oh no.
And we all have bad nights, right? The perfect 365 sleep doesn't exist. No, my son's been sick. And so there's short nights here and there, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that being said, before we dive into all things sleep, why don't you tell me and our listeners a little bit about how you got into such an interesting health coaching business?
Yeah, it's actually funny. I have a background in international business and I used to work in the corporate world in human resources. And I was doing really great. I had an amazing career. I was go, go, go. And I really burnt out. And I burnt out twice within about a course of 3 years. And the weirdest thing was always when I was burnt out that I couldn't sleep. Like I was literally in the mornings, I got out of bed, but I basically made it maybe for 2 hours. And then I was on the couch and I couldn't move. And I didn't understand why every night I was waking up at like 1 and to 4, I was awake every night and my body was craving rest and I just couldn't sleep. And I was like, this is literally killing me. I cannot keep on going like that. And then everything else went down the drain. Like my hormones were all over the place. I had the craziest PMS ever. It was ridiculous. And I worked with naturopaths, I worked with doctors, I went to see therapists because there was a bit of a trauma aspect to that burnout. And all those things didn't really move the needle significantly. Like I got a little better, but I kind of relapsed and it was all not great. And then I found somebody who, like from a holistic perspective, looked at me, looked at everything that was going on in the body at the same time. And then I kind of learned how all these systems work together and we figured it out and I got my sleep back and I was like, you know what, there's so many people struggling with this and women more than men, and we never talk about it and it's all so normal, which it isn't.
It's
And it
not at
shouldn't be
all.
because and so many women, like burnout, I think is such a huge thing anyhow, right? So yeah, those are basically the women now I work with, women who either really can't sleep and some of them haven't for decades, really, or women who are saying, I sleep 8 hours a night, but I could sleep 10 and I'm still exhausted. So what's going on? So those are kind of my two groups of ladies that I work with. And I love it because I think if we're all sleeping well, we're all just doing so much better.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I prioritize sleep. I tell my husband all the time, like, I'm sorry, if I have to go to bed at 8:30, I'm going to bed at 8:30. Like, that's just the way it is.
Exactly.
You mentioned burnout. So not only for yourself, but you described it in your clientele. Can you tell me a little bit about how you would describe burnout in case there are women out there, even men out there, who aren't recognizing that they're actually in burnout?
Well, I think there's lots of different signals, I think, for the things that might be like somewhat red flags that you're getting there. One of the first things I think people kind of notice is this: I can't push as hard anymore, but maybe I just had a bad night's sleep. It's this: I go exercise and I'm really exhausted. And I was just talking to a client and she had the perfect, I was like, are you on a spinning bike? She's like, yeah. She's like, I'm basically making it to the bottom 10% of my Peloton group. And that didn't used to be the case. I'm like, you're exhausted. Like, stop this. If you're not recovering from exercise like you used to, that's a red flag. If you're somebody who really needs to live off sugar and coffee or caffeinated sugary drinks, otherwise you cannot make it till lunch or after, that's a red flag. If your emotions are all over the place, like things that you used to be able to handle, things that life throws at you, you just can't. You're literally either you're panicking, you're super anxious, you're just completely overwhelmed. Those are the first signals where I would say stop and start listening to your body, because that's all it is, right? Is your body showing like hello, and your sleep can go like really off the rails too. Either you can't fall asleep, you lay there and stare at the bedroom ceiling for hours, you get these anxious thoughts. Yeah, or you're somebody like me who just wakes up at 1 a.m. and doesn't know what to do with the rest of the night. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally can relate to this. I ran a gym for 12 years, like ultimately on my own. And these these three things, including my sleep, definitely the overwhelm, that was a big one when I healed from burnout. Was the everyday stress that then came at me after I was healed was just like, it was like nothing. It just like rolled off my back. Whereas when I was really in the depths of things, I couldn't handle anything coming at me. Everything was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Workout recovery, I definitely felt that. I definitely felt more exhausted. I felt like I needed to push through it, but it
Mhm.
nothing ever progressed. You know what I mean? I never felt any results from it, from what I was trying to do. And then obviously caffeine. I mean, if I'm up at 4 a.m, I'm running on caffeine all day. So yeah, those are some really good points. And like for our listeners out there, and anybody who comes across this on social media down the road, those three, and yeah, lack of sleep or just troublesome sleeping if it's interrupted, four things to just really be on the lookout for and start listening. That's a really fantastic point. So you had mentioned that you worked with doctors, naturopaths, therapists, and it didn't really move the needle, as you said. So what was it that they did differently than this person who looked at you from a whole body standpoint or a holistic standpoint? What was the difference?
Um, I have to say my doctor was amazing for what he did in terms of testing, and he was really concerned and he really tried everything. I think from a doctor's perspective, the difference was he had a certain perspective with which he looked at me, and that is mainly blood work. Potentially like a thyroid scan or something like that. But then it was pretty quickly pushed into maybe you should see a therapist because I think this is a traumatic response, which wasn't wrong. And I
Sure.
like that wasn't dismissive in that moment. I didn't feel dismissed either. That was part of the problem in my case, for sure. But there
It's
was so
actually,
much more.
yeah, it's actually pretty amazing, in my opinion, that your doctor would recommend something like therapy, because often it goes right down to pharmaceuticals, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, an antidepressant or
Yeah.
anti-anxiety.
And it was actually
Yeah.
funny because the therapist at the time, after like a few sessions, he's like, "You're actually not on medication?" I'm like, "Yo, you know what? No, I'm not." And I was never even offered, not that I would have wanted, but I was never even, so I thought that was great. Like the doctor was a good doctor.
Yeah.
But still, it didn't, like the talking about things helped with the trauma, and that helped me be like a little more relaxed and stuff. But they ran blood work up and down and left and right, and they never found anything. And then the naturopath ran a bit of a different test. She ran a stool test and she was like, there's some stuff going on, so we're going to fix that. And then eventually maybe we will start to look at your hormones. And it was this piecemealing that took forever. And there was always a part of me that felt better, but another part felt worse. Certain things started popping up everywhere. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm better overall. Yeah, I'm not like on the floor anymore, but I'm not great.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then that was actually in Germany because I'm originally from Germany. And then we moved to Canada because my husband's from here 4 years ago almost. And that move was big. Like relocating an entire family that's a big thing. And then I kind of crashed again. And that's when I found the other practitioner. And she's like, no, let's look at your gut, your hormones, your thyroid, your nutrients, everything at once. And we get the big picture. And then we make a plan. And then we go from there. And that really resonated.
Absolutely.
And that really helped. And then I kind of went into that direction. I was like, yeah, that is how I want to help people. Because sleep used to be like my superpower. And I'm the one, like we just said, I need my sleep too. Like if I don't get it, like don't.
Don't talk to me.
But yeah, and then I just talked about it with other people, and I just saw so many women who were struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to your sleep like a boss or the sleep mastery method, so sleep obviously is a main component of that. What else do you use as a coach in that scenario to help women heal from burnout?
Yeah, so I look at sleep and burnout and energy from the perspective of what does the body need to A, have energy, and B, how can it calm down, and what could interfere with it calming down. So, and a lot of people have heard of the our sleep wake cycles. So we have hormones that are involved in that. We have cortisol, that's a hormone that lots of people know. It's called our stress hormone often, that helps us have energy during the day. And we need melatonin, which a lot of people know from supplementation, that we need at night to be able to sleep. And I basically look at everything in the body that might be upsetting that balance of the two. And that can be psychological, because when you go to the doctor and you say, I can't sleep, they often say, yeah, you just have too much going on. There's just too much stress. And women or people in general then feel very dismissed. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. And that is, to me, that's only part of the equation. Is it stress? Yes. And is it sometimes psychological stress? For sure. So we look at that equation for the sleep, but we also look at the physical stress. What is driving that cortisol in your body that makes you not being able to calm down at night? And that could be things like we've touched on briefly already. That could be things that are going on in your gut. That could be that your hormones, not just your cortisol and your melatonin, but your sex hormones are all over the place or too low often, and that causes these things. Could be that you're lacking the ability to absorb calcium and magnesium properly in a way that your body can use them and calm the system down and actually let you chemically go into a state of relaxation and sleep, right? There's lots of things. And there are sometimes people who've gone through traumatic events in their lives that and those don't have to even be big things. It can just be smaller things, and they add up or they really trigger you, and then that upsets the body in a chemical way, and it just doesn't allow you to break that cycle, no matter how much talk therapy you do or how
Absolutely.
much other kinds of somatic experiences you're trying to create. And so I kind of look at that from all angles to see what are actually the things that, what is really keeping you up, because it's maybe not your mother-in-law that upset you that day. It's probably something underlying.
Interesting. And so do you coach your clients on the psychological as well as the physical, what's going on, or do you have people that you work with that you refer out?
Both. I do parts of what is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. That is actually a framework that gives people lots of tools, how to, like, for instance, manage anxiety better throughout the day and at night, or so we could de-escalate situations where we have people who just lay in bed and are like, ding, bright awake, panic sets in, or people who if we want to start shifting circadian rhythms, because I also sometimes have clients who are like, I get up at 11 o'clock in the morning, but I can't fall asleep before 2 or 3 in the morning. So we kind of need to work. Yeah, so we kind of need to work on shifting that a little more towards a more like a schedule that you can kind of participate in life with a little better. So that's where I use tools from there. If we have really underlying trauma or things that come up in the conversation, then I refer out. Then I often refer to, it's always the person's choice to say, I want to see a therapist or something. And sometimes just that conversation with the coach helps to just create that awareness and to make that step. I also love working with people who are EFT practitioners, so tapping.
Yes,
because it was that was because I had a very traumatic birth experience, and that kind of carried for a while, and was part of that was a trauma part that was part of my whole breakdown. And EFT was the thing that in actually very short time totally gut flip it. And
It
so I
is
just
very
love it.
effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you, I want to talk about trauma a little bit, and you did bring up your trauma birth story. Would you tell us a little bit about that? Would you dive into it a little bit, or is that off limits for today?
No, that's a little bit. I can't go into the super details of it. We basically had our son was born a super preemie, so he was
Okay.
born at almost 29 weeks.
Wow.
And we were in the hospital for 3 months, basically till he was full term.
Oh, wow.
Because he had like there was lots of struggles along the way, and that whole I took on a lot of that burden. Like I made that my fault and I'm guilty and this is all my and he still is well, I don't want to say recovering from that. He still has struggles with that today that will stay, and that's totally cool. But I always kind of blamed myself for that. So that whole guilt story was a massive story that really, really took me down for a long time. And then I had work and I loved my job when I went back, and I gave it all because that was my outlet.
Yeah.
That was you're actually good. You're nailing that job. I had a massive project I was given. I was killing it. It was amazing, but it all just collapsed in the end. It just all came right back down on me. And it was not like, because I hadn't worked through it properly. Right. And yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested, obviously, being pregnant, one.
Yeah. I'm like, should I steer?
There's no story that can scare me at this point. Everybody has told me every scary story. It's totally fine. But I do know about trauma a little bit. And the interesting thing about emotional trauma is ultimately, the story that you tell yourself is really what the trauma is. It's not the thing that has happened. It's what you take from it. And two, it can be something that has been boiling up or compiling up over 30 years.
Yeah,
it can
absolutely.
be something, that has happened in your childhood or in your teenage years, your early 20s, and you just can't rid yourself of that story, or you're just completely unaware that that story even exists.
And you know what? I have a great example, if I may share that, from somebody I've worked with in the past, and she had sleep issues for 30 years. And she was doing everything right. She was following the protocols. And I was like, there is something more here. Like why? Let's dig deeper. And what came out is that there was a big situation while she was in her like teens, where her parents had struggled in their marriage and they were fighting a lot. And her dad kind of used her as a mediator. And so that those fights always happened at night when the kids were in bed. So she had this thing in her mind that she was like, I can't sleep because I might be waking up. And I'm like, you know what? Like, she herself, she was older. She's in her 60s. I was like, your dad's not even here. Like, he's not alive anymore. Mom isn't either. Like, you're good. Like, this is not gonna happen again. But it has been so physically ingrained in her body. Like, she feels it all the time that she just couldn't let go. And when she started working with somebody, and that actually went even in a different direction, we did EFT, and then she also did hypnosis and other things, because it was sometimes EFT is still, even though it's very gentle, it's still sometimes too much for people to go even near that trauma, even if you don't want to go into it, but even just near it. That it's like, it's crazy what the body does and how it then changes everything. And just prevents you from, in her case, getting a good night's sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's interesting, like you said, there are much more less obvious things that can interrupt your sleep than just what we would think of as stress. Because I think that most people, if you were to ask them what stress means to them, they automatically think about things like, financial stress, job stress. It's all very external. But then you touched on, it could be gut, it could be hormones, whether it's sex hormones or energy hormones. And here we are now talking about emotional trauma, which ultimately is like stored in your nervous system. four major things that are internal stressors that people don't even count.
Mhm.
You know, they're gonna think about their sleep, and they're either not gonna recognize that, 5 hours a night is not just their normal, right? Or they're not even gonna think twice about the fact that the thing that happened to them when they were 20 is the thing that's just it's like their subconscious is just bringing it back up every time that she relaxes or he relaxes,
And those are, to be fair, from the people I work with, those are rarer cases.
Sure.
But if you've tried everything, you have to go and like you have to start exploring these things, because you might be missing a big piece of the puzzle. And it is different for everybody, right? That sleep puzzle looks different for everyone. But if you've really done everything and you haven't looked at that, you're potentially really missing a big, big, big area that might be the solution to the problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. Now, in my practice, I don't specialize in sleep by any means. I definitely specialize more locally in gut and hormone related things, but I definitely notice when I was going through my own scenario with my gut issues, that trauma was a big part of it. And when I was EFT tapping and seeing the holistic practitioners that were helping me, whenever I was feeling triggered, people would ask me like, well, where in your body are you feeling it? And I felt it in my gut. And so like, no wonder, my gut was being activated. And people don't think quite like that. I think generally humans think very linearly, and we're like, oh, my stomach hurts or is feeling unwell, I should take this or drink this or not eat this, and that's all I'll do. Diving deeper, working with somebody like you, diving deeper into those the system of the body ultimately is what's going to get them there, instead of having to avoid food.
Absolutely. And I have the same thing. For me, it wasn't the gut, for me it's the liver.
Interesting.
And I always had this pain, and they were like doing their ultrasounds and they were checking everything and blood markers, and nothing came back. And then my holistic practitioner had me on some supplements that were already helping, so I was feeling better. And then with the tapping, she's like, where is it? I'm like, it's in the liver. Like, I'm feeling it. I'm physically in pain. And then we did the tapping, and every time, and sometimes it still comes up, and then I know immediately, like then you can tie it to the emotion. You immediately know, oh, I'm thinking about this and this. My brain's trying to trick me again. And then you can call it out and the pain goes away.
Oh, can I just ask you, because I'm like feeling this from you, even though we're through the phone, the difference you felt when you were burnt out to how you feel when you're healed? Like, if you could describe that in one word, like how would you describe that feeling?
Alive.
Oh, I love that. And I can see that in you as you talk about it.
Yeah, I think I was like, when my little one, he was 5 at the time, when he was throwing, I would get up in the morning with everybody, we'd have breakfast. He would throw a temper tantrum at the breakfast table. Happens, right? For
Sure.
whatever, the cereal wasn't the right kind. I had to leave the breakfast table in tears. I was having panic attacks. Like, it was so overwhelming. I couldn't handle it. My husband was driving the car. I was sitting in the passenger seat. There were days where I couldn't stand cars coming at us or coming from the right. And I was like, oh my God, like, everybody's way too close. I just need to hide and bunker. It's all too much. Where it's like, oh my God, like, how can you can't live like that. And there's just no reason you should be. And that I'm not always the solution to the problem, right? Like, there might, depending on what the person has experienced and what is going on, there might be a long journey for them, and there might be very different help required. But if it's something that comes from a burnout because you've given your everything and all to everybody but yourself, which is exactly what I was doing, and you're ignoring the red flags like a pro, which is what I was doing. I got so sick after Henry was back from the hospital. I had an ear infection that, with antibiotics, well, they're not great for ear infections anyhow, but I didn't know that at the time. But I was on 2 weeks of full-on drugs and nothing moved. And my body was just so exhausted. And I was like, no, I got to get back to work. Like, I really need to feel better. And they're like, no, stay home. I'm like, no. I got to get back. Like, I just wasn't listening. And that was eventually the return that I got for
Yeah.
all
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I'm very happy for you to feel alive again because you can really tell the way you talk about it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to ask you how you would work with a client who wears their lack of sleep or their sleep deprivation sort of as a badge of honor, because I've done it. I feel like you've done it. I have many clients that do it, and they kind of just go, I don't need 8 hours sleep. I do my best on 5 hours sleep. And how would you speak to a client that was sort of in that mindset?
um, I would say, well, generally from what we're seeing, even in the science, most people need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. People who function on 6 hours, like actually perform, is very rare. It just doesn't exist in a lot of people. There are a few, but there aren't many. That you can exist on 5 hours is highly unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
And how you could prove that to me, I'll be happy to take the test with you, is okay, let's do this, but you're going without caffeine and sugar for the entire day. And let's see what happens to your energy. Most people will have to admit that the sugar and the coffee or the caffeine is what keeps them through, that gives them that energy to make it through the day. And that's fair because, yeah, you're sleep deprived. Like, how should your body? And we see it when we sleep, even like there's more and more, even in the corporate culture or in health and wellness, in like the workplace, where we're now talking about nap rooms and people just giving the chance to even like a 10-15 minute nap brings you productivity, like concentration, focus for 3 to 4 hours after. Like, it's amazing the amount of mistakes we make if we're sleep deprived. We're not more efficient. You are
Absolutely.
absolutely not more efficient because you're making mistakes and you're going to be reworking that. So what have we gained, right? And I think that conversation that I have a lot with women, and I get it, is I've done everything for everybody. I needed to clean up whatever the kitchen, make the kids' lunches at night. And then I finally, at 11:30, I finally want that hour for myself. I get it. I
Yeah.
totally get it. And I get that you don't want to go to bed and just feel like you've slept and like been there for everybody else.
Yeah.
I totally get that. And that's how we kind of sometimes end up at the 5 hours. But it's something to really assess, to look at and often that helps to do it with somebody else, right? For
Yeah.
me I'm not judging looking at that. I'm just looking at what you're doing. And I would maybe point out things here and there and say, can we do things differently? Because you're not winning. And it's a long game. Sleep helps with longevity, keeping you young, keeping you healthy overall. There's enough studies that show cardiovascular health, mental health. If we're looking at the brain health, like I'm a huge advocate for mental health, sleep
Absolutely.
is mandatory.
Yes.
And people who suffer from anxiety, depression, like that's one of the first things. If we get them to sleep, they feel so much better. I have so many clients who come on anxiety medication or antidepressants or about to go on because their doctors don't know anymore what to do with them. And then we work on the basics and they get better and they don't need that. And you just really need to start making sleep a priority. And that doesn't mean it needs to take up the majority of your day and night, right? We have 24 hours. You can still be 16 hours productive and still get 8 hours of sleep. So if you look at that, there's still 2/3 that you're actually not sleeping.
I mean, I've had like you didn't have a great sleep last night. There's obviously been nights I've not had great sleeps, but when I sleep so soundly for 8 hours, I wake up like a whole new woman.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Everything becomes better. Like, yes, my productivity at work is obviously going to be better, but my relationship with my husband is better. My patience for my dog is better. You know what I mean? It's so interesting. It really does translate into the happiness of your overall life.
Absolutely. And I think what we often forget, because you were just saying with the relationships and the patience with your dog, anybody who's listening who's had kids or has kids knows this. It's like, oh my God, they had a bad night's sleep. It's going to be a disaster day. And all we say, oh yeah, they didn't get a good sleep. They're going to throw their temper tantrums. They are short fused today. We are the same. We're just 30, 40 years older.
Yes.
It's the exact same thing. We just forget and we put the priority somewhere else. And we know when they get an afternoon nap in, they're a lot better after that. It's a lot more fun to be around them. And we're the same. We just kind of then shove it down sometimes. That grumpiness, we're not as explosive because there's a bit of emotional maturity there.
Sure.
But it just blows up at some point sooner or later in a lot of people as well.
Yeah, you're right. Well, you did touch on the new parent thing, so I have to bring that up a little bit selfishly. If you could give one tip to some new parents who are not sleeping very well, what would that be?
Well, the main thing is, yes, it is a stage in your life where a season in your life where this is normal. Is it hard? Yes. Get the support you can and don't be too proud to take it on. That is one big thing. Anybody who wants to have a meal train going and put your freezer full of food, that's a big one. Like really stack the freezer with frozen stuff for at least in the beginning, especially because you're about to have the baby, right? Like just be prepared. The other thing, really like it's very draining. Sleep deprivation tends us to like go and start snacking, right? Because we need quick energy. Make sure you focus on your nutrition. For the moms, as important as for the dads, but for the moms even more, right? You're going to maybe start breastfeeding. You're just draining so many nutrients. Make sure you're feeding and nurturing yourself well. And we don't need to run, the baby's 2 weeks old. We don't need to run outside and do all the social interaction that we did before. And yes, everybody wants to see the baby. And yeah, I get it. But take your time to rest, that if you can't sleep, that you get rest during the day at some points to really, really give your body a chance to recover.
That's great advice. Like really, really good. Helpful for me. I'm sure it will be helpful for many listeners. So yes. Thank you for that. All right. So you did mention earlier, so you mainly work with women. We have generally been speaking about women in terms of burnout and lack of sleep. There is a theory that's been going around, and I don't know if you've seen it, and I don't know if you subscribe to it, but I have recently read that women tend to need, on average, 2 hours of sleep more each night than men, just based on hormone cycling. So men tend to. Oh, so you don't subscribe to it? Okay, so tell me a little bit. I don't subscribe to it.
I've seen other ones where it's at 24 minutes. And that makes sense because women's circadian, like our circadian rhythm, our sleep, wake, day, night cycle isn't a full 24 hours. It's a bit off. Okay. And women do need it. I would subscribe to the theory that says we need a tiny bit more because of the hormonal fluctuations. Like we are all diurnal, so we're all the day and night people, men and women alike. But as women, we have that added complexity of a cycle, and that could be 26 days, 28 days, 32 days, whatever. But we have that extra cycle over top that diurnal pattern, while men with testosterone, that's basically a 24-hour cycle. So that's a lot easier. That's a lot less complex. And yes, and women have the natural ability to grow a baby. So their body prepares for that every month. So yeah, there is potentially more rest needed. Yes.
Okay, but it's not
2 hours.
necessarily.
I think 2 hours seems a bit high.
Okay, interesting. I didn't mind that theory in general because I could tell my husband, like, hey, I'm going to go to bed. Yeah, but I was just curious to know if you thought that theory was accurate.
But my husband also, he'd be like, yeah, I subscribe to that because I do definitely need 2 more hours.
And I'd be curious to know if at certain times of the month, you could run on a little bit less, or you would need a little bit more, and it would have nothing to do with in comparison to men. It's just what your body is calling for in those times where perhaps it is putting out more energy, or needing more downtime.
Yeah. And you would probably, if you actually listen to your body, which we often don't, and if you're not on birth control, where that is somewhat regulated, like if you have a normal period, then women will notice it that around the time of ovulation, and just maybe often the first night right before you have your period, you don't sleep well. A lot of women just don't sleep well, which has to do with the hormone fluctuations. And then the first days of your bleeding, we often feel it, right? That's when a lot of women might go for a painkiller or something like that, or really like, oh my God, I really wish I didn't have to go to work. I could just stay in bed and rest because I'm just really tired. Yeah, we are. This is like hard work for the body. And if we can give in to that, we'll do a lot better and everything becomes a lot easier. Then meanwhile, once your period's over, you're going to notice you're going to have a ton of energy. Your workouts are better. Your recovery is better. You probably can go on a little bit less sleep. You won't notice it as much. And that's generally fine. If you're generally a good sleeper, I would say, yeah, just listen to kind of what your body needs and give into that. If you're somebody who really struggles with sleep, stay consistent. Try Monday to Sunday. Wake up at the same time every morning and go to bed when you're really tired. But try and keep that consistency and don't do a Monday to Friday. I'm building up like what we call a sleep debt. So I'm not sleeping enough. And then Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to try and catch up because it doesn't work. You've built up so much sleep.
Question.
We've built up so much sleep debt, you won't recover it in 2 nights. The other thing, that is the reason why people dread Monday mornings. Because the human body is cyclic. It loves that routine. And if we mess with those hormone secretions Saturday, Sunday, because we think, oh, let's sleep till 11 instead of 7, the body's like, what is going on? Is this our new cycle? Oh, right. This is what we're doing now. Okay, then let's shift everything forward. And then what happens Monday? You're going to start mega caffeinating because you're super tired. That might eventually potentially lead to you going to bed later because you're still hyped up. That caffeine hasn't left your system. And that keeps on going. If that happens once, it's not a big deal. But if that's a continuous process, that's how people shift their circadian rhythms to going to bed later and later and later and having struggle getting up in the morning. And they have to be at work at 8. And then they're sleep deprived. And then that's kind of how that house cycle goes together in the end.
Yeah. It's a big cascade effect.
Yeah.
Okay. If you could give the listeners 3 like really simple tips like that they could implement today to get a better night's sleep, what would they be?
The first one, when you wake up in the morning, get outside, get natural light in your eyes, 10 minutes. If it's cloudy or if it's sunny, it doesn't matter. If it's raining, I understand we don't necessarily want to go, but get outside. That sunlight, that natural light sets your inner clock and tells your body to release cortisol, and it tells it to release melatonin 14, 16 hours later. Super easy, like it's free. I know it takes a bit of effort to actually do that, but do that consistently for a few weeks and you will see a difference in your energy, in your mood, in everything. The second one, I would say, make sure you're hydrated, drink water. If we're dehydrated, that is stress to the body. That releases cortisol. That alone releases cortisol. And if we have too much cortisol, we don't have melatonin, so we won't be able to fall asleep. So those 2, I think, are very important. The other one that I really like to think about is this concept of your bedtime routine begins in the morning. It's not that half hour before you go to bed. It's what you do all day that either pays into the account of, oh, I'm tired and I'm going to sleep, or I'm actually taking away from that account of, oh, I'm actually not going to be able to sleep. So one thing that I think we all struggle with is this go all day. I'm so busy. I don't have time. Give yourself, and it can be 5 minutes, maybe after your lunch break, where you do something for yourself that maybe even puts a smile on your face, ideally. But it's something, just if you go outside and you sit in the sun, don't bring your phone, don't scroll on social, don't necessarily, if you want to call a friend and say hi, that's great, but don't like just get input, but rather use the opportunity to process information, emotion, whatever has been thrown at you that day, even if it's a 5-minute window. I'm just bringing an example. Your boss upset you, but you have the chance to call a friend and just let it out. It's kind of process. It's good. If you swallow these things down and then you go to bed and you hit the pillow and it's the first time that it's quiet, your mind's going to start bringing all those things up, of course, because it's the first time we've given it in the day to actually start processing that. So we kind of want to build these little islands in the day. And like I said, they can be tiny, 5 minutes, that give you a breather, that give you a chance to just process that so it doesn't happen when we want to go to sleep.
Yeah, those are powerful tips. Absolutely. That one, the last one, building these islands to process, whatever's coming at you during the day. I know that one's hard for people. I know that being conscious, being mindful is something that many people struggle with, but it is overall so important in so many aspects of life, and obviously including sleep.
And we often also make it, I think how we talk about it, we sometimes make it bigger than it is. It's mindfulness. And when we give it these labels,
Sure.
right? But it's like, instead of going to, and I'm picking my former corporate experience, everybody goes to lunch, it's super nice. Afterwards, everybody goes to the coffee machine and grabs himself a coffee and chats there for 10 minutes and then goes back to their desk. So why not, instead of going to the coffee machine and chatting for 10 minutes, go around the block? I know it depends on where you work, but can you just for 5 minutes have a quick walk? Stabilizes your blood sugar too, also helps with sleep, by the way. Then you go to the coffee machine and grab your coffee, and then you're just there for 5 minutes. But right, I don't want to make it overly complicated. I would just kind of see where does it fit in without causing a whole big of a, like, having to reorganize everything.
Yeah, absolutely. What I tend to do in my day is I just take 5 big, deep belly breaths.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and it doesn't take any more than probably 15 seconds. And it's just so relaxing, and I just feel like I can handle whatever comes next. Yeah. Well, Annika, thank you so much for chatting with me today and giving such valuable insight into the importance of sleep. Can you leave us a note with where we can reach you, where our listeners can reach you, whether it's Instagram or your website? Let us know right now, and it will also be in the show notes.
Awesome. Yeah. So you find me all kinds of places: YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm just redoing my website, but you can find the website at sleeplikeaboss.com. And you can find me at _Annika Carroll on Instagram. And if you have any questions, just reach out. Sleep's always such a great topic to chat about.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Annika.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.